Welcome to the Daily Horror Habit Podcast. I'm your host, Jay Krieger, bringing you daily reviews of currently streaming horror movies for your twisted pleasure. Be aware that these reviews may include mild spoilers. And as always, I hope you enjoy. Few horror tropes date back quite as far as the mad scientist. From Mary Shelley's Frankenstein to Reanimator to The Fly, historically, there's never been a shortage of brainiacs dying horrific deaths at the hands of their creations. Given this lengthy and experimental history of film, the question begs to be asked, are there still mad scientist stories worth telling? With a contemporary take on Frankenstein, writer and director Larry Fessenden proves that there are with Depraved, which is currently streaming on Hulu. Relationships are tough. They require work, patience, and compromise, all things that Alex, played by Owen Campbell, and Lucy, played by Chloe Levine, struggle with. So, to make matters worse, Alex is viciously murdered while leaving Lucy's apartment one evening. Seemingly dead, Alex suddenly awakens in a strange makeshift lab. Upon gazing into a mirror, the reflection he sees is both strange and confusing and downright terrifying. He doesn't recognize the surgical scar-covered, stapled-together body he has awoken in. On top of everything else, Alex doesn't remember who he is, having awoken to a literal nightmare. But in Alex's death, Adam, played by Alex Brexa, is born. Alex takes over for Owen Campbell to signify the body switch, yet Alex's mind is very much still of the person we met at the beginning of the film. Next, we're introduced to Henry, played by David Call, a former combat medic suffering from severe PTSD, developed from his time spent overseas. For lack of a better word, Henry birthed Adam's new body, which he's christened as Adam. Serving as Adam's father, Henry undertakes the lengthy process of reteaching Adam's basic motor and cognitive functions. And while Henry revels in his success of bringing the dead back to life, this second lease on life quickly reveals more sinister ulterior motives. By now, the parallels to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein should be blatantly obvious to you, and while the concept is familiar, the length to which Fessenden humanizes the relationship between Frankenstein and his monster is surprisingly moving. Seeing the empathetic father-son relationship grow, only to be shattered by the constant reminder that man is the truest evil of them all, is the definition of tragic. This wouldn't be nearly as impactful if it weren't for Alex's sobering and melancholy performance that even in the darkest moments, you cannot help but feel for him. We feel his frustration and anger at the realization that his existence is solely to be manipulated by his creator. And despite his actions, I couldn't have been rooting louder for Adam to enact revenge on those who have wronged him. Aiding Alex's stellar performance are his equally impressive monster makeup and practical effects. Adam's beleaguered, bruised, and stitched together corpse is hauntingly sickening. The artistic makeup and effects powerhouse of Adelina Atashi, Peter Gurnett, and Brian Spears have crafted a memorable contemporary updating to a classic horror icon. This modern-day monster is a smorgasbord of mismatched and discolored joints, stapled together skin sealing surgical scars that fuels Depraved's constant aesthetic of grotesque discomfort. The film's presentation perfectly captures the chaotic gamut of Adam's rebirthing process to his eventual explosive conclusion. You feel the confusion and unease of Adam relearning the world around him. You see how other characters behave towards him as the viewer tries to understand their potential alternative motives. One scene in particular utilizing camcorder footage that makes the viewer feel as if they've accidentally stumbled upon a dark corner of the deep web. The film is consistently disturbing without ever relying on jump scares or scenes of excessive gore. My qualms with Depraved stem from the film's third act, which feels a bit muddled due to a reliance on characters other than Adam and Henry. The inclusion of these other characters largely detracts from Adam and Henry's relationship, which is the most interesting aspect of the film. Furthermore, Depraved never explores its underlying intriguing themes with more than surface-level examination. Themes such as trauma and PTSD are broached, but never unpacked to the level that could have made characters such as Henry somewhat sympathetic. Instead, we have a character-heavy third act that feels far longer than it needed to be. Depraved isn't a traditional contemporary horror reimagining. The film takes the core of a classic and updates both the circumstances and appearances that its monster is birthed into. The examination and expanding of the monster's humanity deliver a far more heartwarming and heartbreaking coming-of-age tale. While the third act does feel jumbled and more scares would have definitely been appreciated, this is a smart but somber take on the mad scientist formula. I'd recommend it for those who aren't looking for a traditional creature feature, but rather a look at what makes a man and how even men can become monsters. And that'll do it for another episode of Daily Horror Habit. I'll see you guys next week for another round of Daily Horror movie reviews. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to Daily Horror Habit on your preferred streaming service and follow @Daily Horror Habit on Instagram and @Daily Horror Pod on Twitter.